Brad, I got a hankering.
A hankering for what?
A hankering for some open source software.
A hankering for freedom?
Look, I want to compile my own apps from source.
Look, okay, not to get ahead of ourselves, but you wrote in the show notes for this episode that you can compile your own version of one of these to enable something that isn't there by default.
Uh-huh.
I got very excited about it.
Look, I didn't realize that this was a viable option now, and it's changed the way I'm looking at some of the software. This week, we're talking about open source alternatives to closed source professional applications such as Photoshop and Premiere and Maya and, did I say Photoshop?
You said Photoshop.
Okay, Photoshop.
Photoshop.
Yeah, Photoshop. That's it. That's the show. We're going to talk about, we used a bunch of open source creator apps, and here's a big surprise. They're pretty good.
They're pretty good. And
yeah,
they're freely downloadable. They're freely extensible.
Yeah. Freely
usable.
Yeah.
Do we need to make like the open source version of Live Free or Die?
Man, I saw that movie. It wasn't very good, Brad.
Don't proprietary, don't close source on me.
Yeah, I'm going to compile my compile or die. Welcome to the FOSS Pod. I'm Will.
I'm Brad.
Hello, Brad. How was your morning?
Oh, it's free and open as usual. That's how I like to keep things around here.
So this week we are going to talk about the open source versions of tools that you may be familiar with, you may use in a professional context, but they're open source software. This is an exciting topic to me. This is kind of where I started with open source software.
Yeah, I'd say this is probably a lot of people's route into this world, right? Is I have a task I need to do that I don't normally need to do, and I don't want to shell out $300, or I guess in a modern context, I don't want to pay a subscription fee.
Yeah.
To get the professional thing that everybody uses. What else is out there? Oh, here is an audio editor. Here is a 3D modeling package that I can just download, and it works, and it's pretty fully featured. Wow.
And that's exactly it. It's a good place to jump in. It's a good place to develop skills. Even people I know that are professional 3D modelers often don't own their own copy of Maya. They use one that's provided to them through work. So, if they want to do work that's not on the corporate contract or in between jobs, they may not have access to the tools. And it turns out you see a lot of 3D modelers and sculptors learning to use Blender these days when they're in the downtime between jobs, stuff like that.
Yeah, it's a great way to democratize this kind of really high-level complex functionality for people that, like you said, are trying to break in. Mm-hmm. I can tell you also from experience, there might be a situation where hey, you're working for a corporation and you've been tasked with, let's say, editing some audio in a short time frame, shorter than you could request an Adobe subscription from the people in the corporation that handle that sort of thing. And it's well, I can sit here and wait days or weeks for this purchase request to go through, or I could just go download Audacity and do the work right now.
Look, the request has to go up to accounts payable, and then it's got to go through purchasing, and then purchasing crumbles up into a ball and buries it in the dirt behind the building until it turns into a lump of charcoal, burns it, and when the ashes turn into smoke, they use the smoke to discern whether or not the request is approved with a series of truthsayers and seers. So we're going to talk about such applications as Blender, which is I didn't realize this. I thought Blender was for 3D modeling, and then I installed it a few months ago, and I looked at it, and you can do video editing and VFX work and 2D animation and sculpting and all sorts of other stuff in there. It's the open source Swiss Army knife as far as I'm concerned.
Sure.
We're going to talk about Audacity, which we use here every 2 or 3 times a week sometimes.
I have edited countless thousands, maybe at least high triple-digit podcasts with Audacity.
Yeah. We're going to talk about the GNU Image Manipulation Program.
Yes, the GNU Image Manipulation Program.
Colloquially known as GIMP, which is problematic for a multitude of reasons.
Not a great name in 2022.
No. And then we're going to talk about some other stuff that we love that's smaller, kind of one-off. I call them bite-size, maybe, open source apps.
I've got a whole laundry list of little, smaller open source stuff, some fun kind of recent experience with interacting with developers of small open source things and say asking for new features and having them agree. And that feels great.
I love it. So as always, the FOSS Pod is brought to you by Google Open Source. They bring all the value of open source to Google and all the resources of Google to open source. You can find out more about them at opensource.google.
Will, I'm launching Blender as we speak.
Is this your first time?
No, I have launched it before.
Okay.
I dabbled a bit, let's say. I found it's overwhelming. Is the word?
It is. Yeah, I think overwhelming is fair. Like, as a thing that started out as a 3D modeling tool, 3D modeling is always complicated and difficult. It's a hard thing to get into.
Yeah, like I'm not trying to diss Blender at all. I mean, I've seen Maya and 3D Studio Max and so forth over the years. Like, this is no more complicated or less approachable than those. Like you said, it's a very complex technical discipline.
Well, and you're doing something that's conceptually difficult too when you're trying to create 3D objects on a 2D screen, right? Because your brain has to be able to map the different panes and views that you have in a 3D modeling program into 3D space. Like, you have to be able to keep the 3D image of the object in your head while you're looking at it on a 2D surface. And some people, like, I have a really hard time with that particularly. There are some tools that are more successful at that use other metaphors. So for example, like SketchUp lets you create 2D drawings from each side and then extrude them out and intersect them in interesting ways. And you can do that kind of work in Blender as well. So I am not a 3D modeler. I can turn 2D drawings into 3D things and then laser cut them or maybe 3D print them if I'm very lucky.
Hey, you're ahead of me on that.
I mean, it turns out when you have 3D printers and laser cutters, it's a useful skill to have, right? I can do a little bit of hard edge model making. I'm really bad at sculpting. In the 3D modeling world, there's kind of like making monsters and creatures and organic stuff and trees and things like that. And then there's making buildings and spaceships and, I don't know, boxes, crates, all those crates. Those are hard edge models.
Uniform objects.
Exactly. Blender also does a ton of other things too. So is it opened yet?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
No, look, my computer's not that slow, man.
I mean, look, you're due for an upgrade.
Yes, it's a little bit. But yeah, that's like the other functionality is the thing that really piqued my interest because you pointed out, I mean, it does open with like, I guess what I would describe as like a Photoshop-like sort of intro.
It has like a little frame.
Most creative software, I think, has gone this direction these days of like it's not exactly a wizard, but when you launch it, it's like, hey, what kind of document do you want to open? Do you want to use these presets? We're going to smooth your entry into this thing a little bit. And it opens with one of those. And very innocuously, one of the options toward the bottom of that window is video editing.
Yeah.
And you click on that, and it's like, oh, wow, this just turned into Premiere.
Yeah, of the tools in Blender that I am competent with, I'm probably the most competent as a video editor. I've been using Premiere and Final Cut, the pre-X version, and DaVinci Resolve and stuff like that for a really long time now, and know my way around those problems. And I was really pleasantly surprised when I kind of started digging into Blender a month or two ago at how capable it is. It's missing some of the kind of gee whiz machine learning stuff that comes in the newer versions of Premiere. But also, as a person who pays for Premiere, I find that I don't really use those very often. Or at all, frankly. So yeah, I'm really impressed with what I saw out of Blender there, especially as a tool for learning how to do nonlinear video editing. And they do some really neat stuff. Like, they don't differentiate between audio and video tracks. So you can just put whatever kind of material you want on whichever track you want, and then it knows what to do with it, which is, on one hand, seems bonkers, but on the other is incredibly freeing and lets you do interesting layering and stuff like that. And I think that comes as a result of it being not a video editor first necessarily.
Sure, I can see that. So I'm curious about the general ascendancy of Blender that I've seen as somebody that's not even in this world. But I guess, I follow enough game development people that I see like, oh, look at I saw like a graph recently about like, here is the kind of Google interest graph for Blender, 3D Studio Max, Maya, et cetera, and like over the last 4 or 5 years, the Blender line just goes up asymptotically almost. You know what I mean? It's like, I think it is the most searched one of these at this point, and not a big surprise, right? Because it's free.
It's free and it's very powerful, right?
Right.
I talked to some of the technical artists and modelers at our studio, at the game studio I work at.
Yes. So that's what I wanted to ask you about is, like you mentioned earlier, you're not a 3D modeler, but you work with some right now. You've also, I assume, employed some in your past VR life.
I have.
So,
some of them are the same people even.
Interesting. But so yeah, that's what I'm really curious about here is like, what is the penetration into the professional world? Like, obviously it's a great gateway to hone your skills when you're starting out, but like, is it used in production contexts?
So when I asked one of our technical artists, they said basically the thing to know is people use it for stuff like portfolio work all the time. Because if you're in between jobs and you want to keep working, so you have stuff to show for what you've been doing while you were between gigs or whatever, but also to keep skills fresh and whatever, and to learn new things. People have been using Blender in a professional context in games for the last little bit now. The big problem with the pipeline right now is animation, to get 3D assets into the game and textured and with materials applied to them and all that stuff. It's a complicated process. And most studios that we are aware of, and I asked a couple of folks about this with varying results, are still using a more traditional Max or Maya pipeline to do that integration part of the making. But a lot of people are starting their sculpts and starting their hard edge stuff in Blender these days, and then bringing it through Maya or Max on the way in. So maybe through a technical artist or something like that, which I thought was really interesting. Typically, when you're at a game studio, you use one or a very small number of rigs, the bone and mesh, for all of your characters, right? Building the rigs is a really expensive part of the game development process, and you don't want to have to build a whole bunch of them. You want to use just one over and over again, both from a cost perspective and from a performance perspective. So you use your 3D modeling program to build the triangles and meshes and whatever that make up the models. And then you have to rig them, which is a job that typically a technical artist does, where they say, okay, this vertex moves with this bone in this relation, yada, yada, yada. That's both a high skill and a high nuance thing. And that's something that Blender doesn't really do yet. And so because you want that consistency and you want the same rig to work for all of the artists and all the people in the studio, you end up with Blender not being a great solution for that at this point. However, since there are a lot of smaller studios happening now where you have one technical artist, maybe one animator and one 3D modeler, or maybe one person is 2 or 3 of those roles, right? Then you are starting to see Blender pick up a lot of slack, because it sometimes makes sense to just work within what Blender can do rather than paying thousands of dollars a year to Autodesk for Maya or Max or whatever the other alternatives are. And Blender is getting to the point where it's good enough to do the whole thing soup to nuts in the same way that you do inside Maya or Max, which is why the Google trend line is going in the direction it is right now for Blender. It's a powerful, like I said, everybody that I talked to said it's powerful, but it doesn't have the integration yet to be the only thing that you use.
Right. Okay, so to get a little more comprehensive here, I've opened up that little splash screen, the kind of, hey, you just started this, what do you want to do thing?
Hey, newbie, here's a friendly interface for you.
So the options that I touched on earlier, is general 2D animation, sculpting, VFX, and video editing. I mean, video editing obviously is the kind of Premiere-ish nonlinear.
Mm-hmm. The video editor is kind of like going to Canada, right? If you're American.
Okay, interesting. It's an interesting metaphor. Go on.
But like, you're driving around and like you expect to see a Dunkin' Donuts on the corner, and instead it's a Tim Hortons, but otherwise it's more or less the same.
Now I see. If you take this in the coffee and donuts direction, I'm with you.
Like the signs all say kilometers, but they're still in English. I don't know what a kilometer is, but it's like a third of a mile-ish. I can figure that out. That's kind of what the video editor is like.
Sculpting, 3D modeling, right? We've kind of touched on that stuff.
Yep.
2D animation.
2D animation is exactly what it says. You can take a Photoshop style canvas with multiple layers and then draw with onion skin type layering where you can see the previous frame or two, and just draw on a canvas and do literal 2D animations. You can then fill colors in and stuff like that. I made a little like 30 frame animation of a smiley face turning into a frowny face, and it was embarrassing, so I didn't save it. But
why did you not always save your throwaway work? That could have been the show art this week.
Well, I was going to say, one of the neat things about this is it's really easy to pick up and use. They've done a really lovely job with their user interface and kind of user experience, in that it is easy. It seems like they do a thoughtful, good job about mimicking the existing tools that are out there when that makes sense, and then also splitting off and going their own way when it makes sense. Like when I was talking about with the video editing, where you can just put whatever kind of source on whichever row you want in the nonlinear video editor. That is an incredibly powerful thing that you can kind of do in Premiere and DaVinci and apps like that, but it doesn't make it explicit, and they still split them into audio and video, which makes it a little more challenging to use. And it means that you can't, like if you're syncing everything to an audio track, that's kind of the most important track, right? So it is maybe the best designed open source consumer-y app that I've used from a user interface perspective. And that's noteworthy enough that it's worth shouting out, I think, and really talking about. The other thing we haven't talked about yet is VFX editing.
Yeah, so that's the last one on the list. I was going to ask, like, does that map to, let's say, After Effects the way the video editing would map to Premiere? Is it more complicated than that?
I mean, kind of, yeah. If you want to build... So this is a place where the app is really extensible. When you're doing a VFX project, you can get these objects that are OpenVDB volumes, and people create them. You can download them, and they can mimic things like fire and sparks and purple bubbles and whatever your kind of... If you think about particle effects from like early 2000s to mid 2010s video games, that's kind of what we're talking about here. And then you can render those in interesting ways. You can render them as videos with alpha layers. So if you want to put fire on top of your OBS screen, that's a good way to generate some transparent fire that will look better than the people that shoot fire on front of green screens and try to key out the flame. Like that just doesn't work. You have to render fire if you want it on top of a video. So that stuff's really interesting. I assume you can also do motion graphics and stuff like that. I haven't spent a lot of time with that. That is a part of making videos that I am like, I don't want to say bad because that implies that I have any skill at all. I don't have the right kind of brain for that work.
Look, so everybody has to start somewhere, right? You're only bad until you're good, right?
Hey, look, I'm usually good about encouraging people to be aspirational, but I know where I land on this one. So
it's fair, I guess. But I mean, that is the power of this stuff, though, right? Is that like, hang on, I just deleted the install file earlier, but I had to go look real quick and confirm here. But I want to say this is like a 300 megabyte download or something?
It was very small.
205 megabytes, actually. Obviously, because it's open source, it's out there for everything. Windows, Mac OS, Linux. Apparently it's on... Is Blender really on Steam now? Blender is on Steam.
Well, you can download Blender on Steam, yeah.
You could just go to Steam and download it for free with one click. But like that's kind of the point, right? When I say you're only bad until you're good, if you have the time and the willpower and the curiosity, like there's nothing stopping you from going and getting this and dabbling and like, hey, maybe this is something you would like to get into and you don't know it yet.
Exactly.
Do you ever click on the help menu anymore? Like I think I've spent like the last 15 plus 20 years disregarding the help menu in most applications.
I use it a lot in these types of apps because generally they have pretty good context-aware help generally.
That's what I was going to say is I feel like stuff in this space has gotten better in that respect recently. But like, yeah, the help menu in Blender is very robust. They have a web-based manual that's like incredibly thorough tutorials, community stuff. Like they literally link to user and developer communities. They even got reference for, I guess there's a Python API that you can use to write plugins and extensible stuff.
My understanding is you can write a ton of, like if you want to automate behaviors and actions, you can do a lot of that with Python if you're a Python scripter.
Right.
I described it in the intro as a Swiss Army knife, and it is, having spent more time with it, it is a truly incredible piece of software.
Will, I was all ready to roll into this Audacity segment by putting you on the spot about your contentious relationship with Audacity and its style of editing. But,
hit me.
Some things have changed recently that maybe you're going to warm up to it a little bit. I have been using Audacity for like 8 years, as I mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the only thing I've ever really edited audio in. And you've spent time with Audition and some other commercial solutions.
Yeah, we used Pro Tools and Audition and a bunch of different things over the years that tested for podcast editing. I mean, even GarageBand. So for a long time, Audacity was a destructive audio editor, meaning when you placed a cut, if you then realized that you put the cut in the wrong place, there was no way to like wiggle the cut. I like to have a non-destructive audio editor where when you make the change, it doesn't affect the source files. It's just saying, hey, we want this segment to be from this time code to this time code. And then when you render it all out at the end, then maybe there's a change to the source file, maybe not, depending on the editor you're using. But there's wiggle room on those cuts. So for example, if you're listening to the final cut of your podcast, as we often do, and you realize that there was a transition that you kind of muffed up, you cut somebody off too early or you let them go too long, probably cut off too early is the example here, then you could just grab the edge of that cut and move it a few milliseconds either way until you got exactly where you needed it to be. And with a destructive audio editor, really the only way to do that is to like undo over and over again.
That is correct. Can say from experience. And then if you save that project and close it and open it later, all of those undos are gone.
Yeah. And I'm going to go and tell you, it sucks and is time consuming. And if you make a mistake, then it's incredibly punishing.
Hey, what if, let me just posit this.
Okay.
What if you never made a mistake?
I mean, look, Congratulations, first. But mistakes are human, and also sometimes you share a edit of a thing that you edited, and somebody's like, you know what? I thought I said something really clever after this, and I would like to have that back in. And you're like, oh.
Yeah,
well, that's gone forever.
Right, exactly. So recovering specific audio is the one thing you can't do with a destructive editor. I mean, I will say I've gotten very good over the years at catching my mistakes and undoing, but also like performing what I think of as kind of audio surgery of like adding half a second of silence in here to pad something out, or like taking something one person said and moving it in front of something somebody else. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There are ways around it, but you're right. It's fiddly. It takes a lot of detail work to massage things, but
it's more that it's less forgiving. Like, you have to get it right on the very first try.
Right.
Because if you don't, the penalty is open up the whole file again, go copy and paste out the little bit that you need and dump it back in there and hope that it works this time.
There are ways. Trust me, I've done some backflips, some audio backflips over the years. But anyway, like, things have changed on the Audacity front, like pretty recently, actually, with kind of the 3.1 time frame.
Yeah, it's their last major release. They added non-destructive editing, right?
Right, yes. So you can, and I don't use it. That's the thing. It's like kind of the revelation of planning for this podcast is that I'm still doing things destructively because that's what I'm used to. But they do have, and you use Audition, and you tell me, is this exactly what you're talking about? Like, you can drag the edge of a clip back out to recover old audio now, like they have added that in.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So if you make a cut that's too short, or you cut off a segment and you realize you should have left some in there, then you don't have to hit the undo button 50 times to get back to when you did the cut and then redo all of your work after that again. You can just grab the part that got cut too short, stretch it out a little bit until you get to the right part of the waveform, and then release it, and it's there, and move everything further down the timeline. Just move it further down. It's a powerful way to do this. Like, just to be clear, I think Audacity is an incredible piece of software.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, we've used it to record every episode of the Tech Pod and every episode of the FOSS Pod.
To me, it is like one of the classic workhorses of open source. I mean, it's been around for like 20 plus years now.
Yeah.
I may have mentioned in a previous episode. So I had a computer music class as an elective in college, and I had to do a final project, and I am 99% sure Audacity is what I downloaded, like a very nascent, probably 1.0-ish version of Audacity to do my final project in. I mean, it's been around forever. It is good at a lot of stuff, you know? Basic recording is quite straightforward. Basic editing, as you said, like it's been maybe a little limited on that front until recently. But you can even do things like pair it with an FFmpeg executable to give it support for like basically every single format under the sun.
Yeah.
So it's great as like a converter, you know, if you've got like a audio file in a weird format, or you need to convert something for work or whatever. Much like Blender, it is pretty Swiss Army knifey for audio.
Well, and it has this incredible extensible scripting interface and plugin interface. So like astronomers use it to do analysis of scientific data. They take radio astronomy telescope signals and run it through Audacity to find the things that they're looking for. It's an incredibly versatile piece of software.
Yeah, so I mean, it takes multiple kinds of plugins. Like there's the more classic kind of digital audio workstation style, like VSTs and stuff like that. It can take some types of VSTs that are out there. But it also has this Nyquist plugin system that is literally a plain text system. I have quite literally copied a block of code from a forum post, put it into a text file, dropped it in the right directory, and it shows up under the tools menu as a plugin, as a thing that just works. It's kind of wild that it's that direct a pipeline from somebody literally just like pasted the code into a forum post and here you go. I mean, for audio processing, for kind of workflow extensibility, it's kind of wild to me that it works that seamlessly. Is
there a big central repository of those plugins, or are they kind of distributed and shared on everybody's GitHub pages or whatever?
I think it's more the latter. There may be, and I've never really come across it, but my experience has very much just been like, I'm Googling for, hey, does Audacity do this? And then it's not out of the box, but here's somebody that in 2012 posted a plugin to the Audacity forums, and here you go.
Having gone through this process with a couple of different projects lately, where I was looking, I know that there's this functionality exists in plugins. It seems like there's a read the docs / GitHub style opportunity for a generic plugin repo for your open source projects from OBS and Audacity and all. Anyway, that's a different topic for another day. But look, it's a workhorse. You said it.
It really is.
It's an incredible piece of software. You can do all sorts of work with it. I found out on Windows, on OS 10, it's fine. It has the core audio integration with the OS that lets you connect to multi-channel mixers and stuff like that. So you can do like your full digital audio workstation processing with it if you want. On Windows, that's not been possible because the ASIO interface that you use on Windows is closed source and proprietary. It's owned by this company called Steinberg.
I did not know that. So that's ASIO is what you're pronouncing. That's the acronym.
Yeah, that's the one that bypasses all the Windows mixer stuff and just goes straight to the hardware. And for example, I have an 18-channel mixer over beside me. And when I use the ASIO interface, I can hook up to all 18 channels. Like I can plug instruments into each of those 18 ports, microphones, whatever I want, and record and address each one of them individually.
It's really just running your own symphony in there, huh?
Well, I mean, look, I have 3 microphones hooked up to it. It's pretty fancy.
Fair.
But the interesting thing about, because it's open source, because Audacity is open source, you can download the SDK that's closed source. And the only thing that's illegal about integrating the Steinberg stuff, okay, licensing talk.
Yes.
It's a closed source SDK, and Audacity is GPL.
To clarify, you're talking about the ASIO SDK.
The ASIO SDK, yeah.
Yes.
So there's 2 ways that this could be distributed and integrated. One is that Audacity could publish the source of Steinberg, which allows them to comply with the GPL, right, of the Steinberg ASIO interface, which Steinberg is going to be unhappy with.
Yes, from a legal standpoint.
From a legal standpoint. Or they could publish just the source for Audacity without the Steinberg stuff and then distribute the closed source, which is a violation of the GPL. So the end around here is that they provide tools for Windows users. They provide instructions for Windows users to download the compiler, download all the stuff they need. You get a copy of Visual Studio, and you just compile your own ASIO-enabled version of Audacity.
So I did not know about that part. This is something that you'll run into all over the place. I mean, like another classic example is FFmpeg had NDI support. NDI is a new tech video codec protocol for
it's like streaming video over IP, basically.
High quality video over LAN, essentially. And yeah, like long story short, NewTek, a corporation, was distributing binaries of FFmpeg with the NDI support in there, which they were not supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
It's a weird... I know it's complying with the letter of the law in all these situations. The letter of the law is you cannot distribute ready to go, ready to run software with this proprietary stuff in it, because that violates the license. You can put the source code for that out all day long and just let people build it themselves. Like, it's just an extra hoop to jump through. The end result is the same. You're still going to get the same software at the end, but they can't do it themselves. But I did not expect that was the case here. I didn't realize that you can just straight up build your own Audacity with this extra interface inside.
That wouldn't be possible if Audacity wasn't open source.
Right.
I mean, it also wouldn't be a problem that exists if Audacity wasn't open source. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. But the upshot is I get what I need, and I'm going to actually compile it. Now, the downside is you won't get the automatic updates, because when a new major version comes out of Audacity and you want the new features, you're going to have to download the source and recompile it and all that, which will take, I don't know, I would guess an hour probably.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's time, it's work. It's kind of awesome, though. I mean, you kind of need to derive some satisfaction from building your own software, I guess, to do this. But, like, I mean, they've got the instructions right here on the Audacity wiki for, like, download the free version of Visual Studio Community Edition, download and install CMake and Python. I mean, it's not nothing. That's some fairly technical stuff, but I find it pretty enjoyable.
My guess, and I should have done this before the episode, I didn't. I literally just, as I was looking up the ASIO interface, because I was like, oh, this is a thing we should talk about. I found this page about 10 minutes before we started recording, so maybe we'll touch base on how this went in an upcoming episode. But yeah, you should download Audacity, and you should learn how to edit audio, because it's really fun. That's my TLDR here.
Yeah, start podcasting. I hear they're very big these days.
Okay, Brad, I'm looking at a big picture of green pepper right now.
Ooh, you're making a pizza?
You put green peppers on pizza?
Don't even know. We cannot get into this. Move on.
It makes the whole pizza taste like green pepper. Okay.
It's the best. Software. Open source.
I'm talking about the GNU Image Manipulation Program.
Ah, yes. I'm familiar with it.
It is, it's a kind of unfortunate acronym that was probably quite clever when it was started in like the early 2000s or late 90s.
It was a different time. Pulp Fiction was big.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so it's basically an image manipulation program.
Yes, it is your open source Photoshop.
Colloquially known as GIMP. We maybe aren't huge fans of the name, but the tool seems pretty good, especially compared to things that cost annual subscriptions.
Yeah, I mean, it is absolutely fine in a pinch. It'll do all the basic stuff you would want a lightweight Photoshop-ish sort of thing to do.
I think lightweight is probably unfair, but
I guess I mean, it's got a good amount of functionality. You know, it's got all the kind of standard history and layer type stuff that a good one of these has.
Yeah, and that's what it is. It reminds me a lot of, I don't know. It's like the mustache and goatee version of Photoshop, right? Like, what if Photoshop went to the Star Trek Mirror universe in like 1995?
Oh, okay. I almost stopped you there for a second because there are a lot of different styles of mustaches and goatees, and I needed to clarify which ones. You're talking about evil facial hair.
Look, to them, we're the evil facial hair universe, right?
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's true. Yes.
But the point is, I think they looked at what Photoshop was in the late 90s and went in a completely different direction in a lot of ways. But like, you can see what's going on with it, right? I guess this is my bad metaphor for alternate development software hierarchies episode. So I've been lucky enough to have, or unlucky, I guess, depending on how you look at it, have access to Photoshop through work for the last, decade or two. And as a result, I haven't spent as much time using the alternatives as I probably should have. But having spent a little bit of time using GIMP in the last several weeks, it is like I was able to figure out what was going on and use it and do the things that I do in Photoshop, which are not serious graphic designer Photoshop things, but more, hey, I need to crop and place some stuff on a series of layered images to make a thumbnail or whatever, and then render that out to PNG or JPEG or, your image format of choice at a specific resolution. And that was all really easy to do.
Yeah, just the basics. I mean, even more basic than what you're talking about. If you literally just need to like resize an image and export it as a different format, it is absolutely more capable than, let's say, something like Paint 3D that is included with Windows.
The one thing I will say is that a lot of their defaults, where Photoshop has definitely skewed toward the real professional content creator, graphic designer, artist, stuff like that over the last several decades, the defaults in the GNU Image Manipulation Program are pretty good out of the box. So, for example, like their brush designs for the ones that are designed to add noise and stuff like that to make your textures look real and things like that are much better out of the box than the ones that come with Photoshop, which basically expects you to know how to make those kinds of things. And the same thing goes for like image masking and stuff like that. A lot of it was much more in the like, hey, this is how it used to work in Photoshop a long time ago in a way that makes sense for my brain, versus the new multi-layer masks and stuff like that in Photoshop, which can be pretty confusing, frankly.
Yes.
And Brad,
yes,
one of the default brushes is a green pepper.
Oh, I know. I actually have just placed, let's say, about 40 of them myself.
You can try airbrushing them.
Okay.
So you can push and hold the normal default brush.
Okay.
And then they kind of ghost in. You can have ghost peppers.
Look at that. Oh, man. Yeah, ghost peppers.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, if you have basic image editing needs, this thing is totally going to get the job done if you want to do it without paying any money, which you very well may.
And if you have like fancy tablets and stuff like that, it seems to support most of that stuff. So
yeah, and it's got some scripting. I believe there is a Python-based scripting engine built in. As most open source projects tend to have, you can code some extra stuff yourself.
So you're saying if I wanted to animate this sweet green pepper,
you could probably do that.
Sounds good to me. So now that we're into the section of short hits, Brad, what's next?
Why don't we touch on Firefox a little bit? I haven't used Firefox in ages. I know you're a fairly avid user. And I mean, like, look, anybody listening to this podcast knows what Firefox is. We're not raising awareness here.
Well, I mean, you never know, actually. But I've been using Firefox for almost 2 years now as part of my don't use products from trillion-dollar companies anymore if I don't have to initiative.
Yeah.
And
admirable.
I quite like it. They do some really interesting things with container tabs and privacy-oriented features that do things like put all of the pages that might have a Facebook cookie or a Facebook script on them in their own individual buckets. So you're instead of being one ghost profile on Facebook, you're as many tabs as you have ghost profiles on Facebook, which is exactly what I'm looking for in that regard.
Sure.
They have the same kind of extension infrastructure that Chrome, or I assume Safari, does at this point. I haven't used a Mac in a really long time. And the entire browser is open source, which is nice, as opposed to...
That's what I was going to ask, because browsers are kind of a weird category for open source, because I assume the rendering engine of basically, if not literally, every browser on the market is open source, right?
Well, I think now that Edge is using Chromium, yeah, they all are.
Yeah,
because WebKit's open, Chromium is open, Firefox is open.
But Firefox top to bottom is open source, right? It's not just the code that renders the actual contents of a web page. It's like the whole scaffolding and infrastructure behind the browser, right? From account handling to plugins to the whole ball of wax.
Well, the plugins I don't think have to be open source, but everything else, you can go to Mozilla's website and download source code and compile it yourself if you so desire.
Right.
The other thing that they do that's really nice is if you back in the Chrome days, and I think Chrome has gotten better in the time since I stopped using Chrome, I like to have a lot of tabs open. I have, at this point, probably 80 tabs open on my computer, which I know is bad and embarrassing.
That's a lot.
It's too many.
Most people run into similar situations, though.
Yeah, and the nice thing is Firefox tends to do memory management on those tabs much better than the other browsers I'd used on Windows at the time. So it keeps the tabs that you've used recently and that you have pinned kind of always loaded. And then the rest of the stuff that's on your tab thing only gets loaded into memory as you access it. It eventually kind of goes to sleep and it will wake back up when you do it, which does have a little tiny bit of downtime, but I'll take that over filling 32 gigs of memory with my bad browser habits. And then the last thing is, this is another feature that was added to Chrome fairly recently, but you can set up container tabs for whatever. So I have a container for work stuff and for personal stuff. So for example, if I want to log into my Xbox Live account that I play games on to see something on Microsoft site, I can do that with my personal container, and in my work container, I can use my work account that I use to log into like the Microsoft backend to maintain the game and stuff like that, which is incredibly useful.
Those can coexist in the same window as tabs next to each other?
Same window as tabs next to each other. And you can even like color code them. So my personal tabs have a little blue bar on the top. My work tabs have a little pink bar on the top. So I don't make any mistakes.
Right. The market share situation with Firefox is lamentable.
It's bad.
Would say. It's not great.
That said,
it's been in, I think it's been in decline.
I will say that even with the like sub 10% market share that Firefox is running these days, I haven't hit a page that doesn't work in a really long time. Firefox works great with even stuff that has traditionally been unfriendly to third-party browsers like Gmail and your Office 365 and all of that kind of stuff.
It's the little browser that could.
Look, I believe. And plus, it's a nice little Fox logo.
Keep flying that Firefox flag.
Yeah, get that red panda.
Yeah.
Brad, can we talk about VLC a little bit?
Yeah. Some of the stuff we've rattled off here is kind of like, here's your free and open source alternative to some kind of big software packages you might need. I think at this point, we're just sort of like, here's some fun FOSS stuff that we use.
Here are things that we think are awesome.
Because like, I don't think I would say VLC is an open source alternative to anything. VLC is the standard.
Yeah, it's pretty much the market leader for watching video of all formats on your PC. Although there are some alternatives to VLC coming on now, it seems like.
Yes. Although, of course, this is kind of the same point we made about OBS in the first episode of this podcast, right? Of like, it appeared as a scrappy open source upstart against a bunch of commercial paid solutions, and now it is the standard, and VLC, kind of the same thing.
It's very true.
So VLC kind of just works in my experience. Like, it kind of doesn't fail to do anything you want it to do from a media playback standpoint.
Usually, if it won't play a video, it's not the app. The problem is with the video.
Right.
So
what is the oldest video you can... Oh, it plays Cinepack, I believe. I can tell you that because I downloaded that Edie Brickell video from the Windows 95 CD from archive.org a while back.
Wow.
And it played it just fine. I believe Cinepack is the codec for that thing. 1995 video.
It'll play real media, I think. I can't remember. I feel like I've done that. Like I said, if you try to get VLC to play something and it won't play, you probably should just stop bothering at that point, unless you want to get into real like data reconstruction, weird spaces.
Right.
The notable place where VLC fails is if you have an MP4 file that didn't close properly, in which case that video is probably dead, in my experience.
Sure. VLC has a lot of interesting tangential applications, though, besides just kind of playing the media that you pirated from the internet or whatever you're using it for, you criminal.
I ripped those discs.
Also, speaking of ripping discs, I mean, like, let me just rattle off things I have used VLC for.
Okay.
In the last couple of years, let's say. So yeah, speaking of playing ripped discs, I mean, I have a bunch of family home movies that my parents had transferred to DVD years ago, and they're on like plain old photochemical dye. Burned to DVDs, which those aren't going to last much longer than the VHS tapes they were captured from.
Limited shelf life, especially at temperature.
So I backed up. I had imaged all of those DVDs that the service gave us and have those on my NAS now. But like VLC will mount. I mean, those the actual. I think in my case they're either ISOs or .img. I forget what format, but like VLC will read like a raw ass DVD, not ripped to some other format, but literally the like .vob files that are straight off the DVD. It'll mount and read that and play it as the disc. It'll reproduce the menus, like they're interactive, like it is literally the entire DVD top to bottom. Like it's got all that built in.
I didn't know it did menus and stuff now. That's really cool.
It absolutely does the DVD menus. Supposedly you can make it do Blu-rays as well with menus and stuff. I've not really spent time messing with that. If you have not rips of DVDs, but like straight up backups of DVDs, it will reproduce that functionality entirely.
It's also really nice because it will let you load in different tracks for the same video. So, for example, if you have a video, if you ripped a DVD and didn't rip the subtitles properly or something like that and want subtitles for somebody, or you want subtitles for a different language, you can download those from the internet. Probably that's of questionable legality when I think about it, but
maybe
you can inject them and add appropriate delays and stuff like that.
Yes. It'll open network streams. I mean, a lot of this, in fact, all of it, if you just go to the media menu, which is basically the file menu in VLC, it's all just kind of there, but I think a lot of people don't really pay attention to that stuff. So it'll open network streams, video streamed over a network, such as the internet. Perhaps you've heard of it.
The internet, eh?
But you can do things, and like you tell me what the propriety of doing something like this is, but like you can dump the .m3u8 URL from Twitch or YouTube, which is like the URL that actually describes the stream that is being played.
Really?
And feed that into the open network stream dialog in VLC and just play whatever live Twitch or live YouTube stream is happening in VLC without any of the extraneous web crap.
Wow.
I've done that on numerous occasions, just like watch a Dota match or something. It's like, I don't want to keep a browser open. I don't want to like deal with chat taking up space here. I'm going to feed the actual stream URL of this video into VLC, and it literally just plays in VLC as if it was a local file on your hard drive.
Okay, so one of the other things that Firefox does that I really like, not to jump back, but you can pop out any video window into its own window.
Okay, so it's similar to that.
Yeah.
Like this is just another way to accomplish that, but I find VLC to be pretty lightweight and like, it resizes well and stuff like that. So that's like a nice way to watch a live stream sometimes if you feel like jumping through that minor hoop.
That's awesome.
The other thing, and this is also under the media menu, is there's an option that is open capture device. And you can use VLC to give you a real-time feed of whatever is coming into your capture card.
Wow.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
And that's pretty fiddly. You have to supply it with, like info about your direct show device and stuff like that in Windows. I mean, it's
the normal, it can't query to see what's being sent. It just has to know what to look for. And
right. Yes.
If your settings don't line up. Yeah.
You have to specify everything about the feed, but I shortcutted that in a way, actually from the command line, because you can open VLC from a command line.
Ooh.
So I actually I have a very, very long string of information about all the parameters of my capture card that I saved as an environment variable. And then I can just open a terminal window and type VLC and the name of that environment variable, and it will open a nice 1080p feed of whatever audio and video are coming into my Elgato capture card in real time. It's very useful.
So
extremely useful.
That is incredibly, I
esoteric.
I had no idea though. Like, that's really cool.
Yeah.
It's another one of these kind of Swiss Army knives. I use VLC a lot to find out what codecs I've used to, literally I've been ripping discs for 15 years now, 12, 15 years. And the variety of codecs and audio codecs and subtitle formats and disc structures that I've ripped means that often it's easier to just go back and re-rip an old disc than it is to fix something that I did a bad job on in 2010. And VLC is really good for like giving me a surprisingly quick and easy way to see that by just dragging it. You drag the video onto the window and then go to the codec information page and it'll tell you everything that's inside the container.
Yeah. It does a lot. If you work in audio and video of any kind, there's probably a role for VLC in your workflow somewhere.
This next one is one I didn't know about until this morning when we were working on show notes for this episode, and it has immediately rocketed to the top of my open source hits list.
Is it EarTrumpet?
It's EarTrumpet, yeah.
EarTrumpet is one word, pretty damn good.
Yeah.
And it's the kind of thing you wouldn't even know is open source unless you went to the homepage and saw that, they have a GitHub link to where you can get the source because it's available on like the Windows Store, for example.
Yeah.
It is packaged and put on the Windows Store just like any other like paid application. Not that you pay for it, it's free, but like you wouldn't know that it was open source and unless you kind of went and did some digging.
I downloaded it using WinGet, and
that works.
It's a tool that lets you basically route. So it uses the systems that are built into Windows that let you route audio to any of your existing audio interfaces.
Yeah. Just to set the stage, it replaces the little volume icon in your system tray in Windows.
Or it lives beside it in Windows 11.
Yeah, well, the intention is that you hide the system one because it looks exactly the same. It's literally the same little speaker icon.
Yeah.
It's tremendously more robust and faster for switching between different audio devices. For example, if you have like external speakers on your Windows machine and like say like an Astro Mix amp or some kind of headphone amp or an audio interface, multiple things that output audio in Windows, it lets you right click and just switch between those like incredibly fast. You can also open it and see every application that is open on your system and set the volume for each of them individually with sliders in like 2 seconds.
Again, these are all things that are built into Windows.
Right. It's just that Windows has all this great functionality that it absolutely does not expose.
Yeah. This is exceptional.
That's literally like why I love open source software, just like all that stuff I was talking about with VLC. It's like, hey, this stuff just exposes a bunch of functionality that was there anyway, but now I can actually get to it.
Yeah, it's really, I'm very excited about this. It lets me put music out of my speakers while I keep my video conference in my headphones. I'm very excited about it.
Yes, you can do stuff like that in like 3 clicks in 2 seconds. Like, it's super handy. You can see all the levels of the audio out of each application bouncing in real time, so it's really easy to see like what's too loud, what is making noise, and what's not.
Yep.
It's awesome. EarTrumpet.
Do you want to talk about Notepad++?
I like Notepad++. I feel like that's kind of an old workhorse.
It's my go-to text editor, mainly, and this is the stupidest reason ever for liking something, but mainly it saves files even when I forget to save between sessions.
Yeah.
So it's safe to use, and it has a nice tabbed interface for doing text editing. It does context highlighting for different scripting languages and different programming languages. Yeah, it's just a really robust text editor for Windows that kind of Windows didn't have for a long, long time.
Yeah, and it's a monospace editor, and I mean, I guess any text editor can be a monospace editor if you use the right font, but you know what I mean? It's like, It's kind of geared toward coding. It's got a lot of built-in syntax highlighting for different languages, which is really handy if you need to open code or any kind of config files or anything. Also, it has a very charming little lizard as a mascot, which I find.
And a nice dark mode, which until very recently, default Windows text editor did not have.
Yeah, it's got good theming support, so you can actually, there's all kinds of different color schemes you can use. Notepad++, it's been around for ages, but
it works.
It's good stuff. Yes.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about Windows Terminal?
Windows Terminal.
This is one of the ones that I was surprised that this was open source, actually.
Really?
Yeah, I did. I know we talked about it on the TechPod ages ago.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that like Microsoft has replaced a core component of Windows with an open source thing.
Yeah. I can't remember what they called the previous one is just like the generic Windows command host or something like that.
Well, there's the PowerShell and CMD.
Console host. No, those are shells. I'm talking about the console host. Thing that, because the terminal is what draws the text to the screen. The shell is the thing that interprets what you're typing.
Yeah.
And actually runs stuff. I think it was console host is the name of the old one.
I don't think people used it though.
Remember if you typed CMD into Windows prior to like Windows 10, prior to Windows Terminal coming out, like remember the tiny little text DOS looking console that would come up? That was the old console host, which Windows Terminal now replaces, and it's open source, which is kind of, like you said, it's weird to track Microsoft's kind of progress through open sourcing things. Remember when they open sourced the calculator?
Remember when they said that open source was evil?
No, yeah, but this was after that, remember?
Yeah, no, it's a sequence of events is what I'm saying.
It's extremely amusing to me in retrospect that they chose the calculator to open source as their first entry into that world.
What's next? Minesweeper?
Edge, actually, I just double checked. Like Edge, the browser has a GitHub repo now. Like I think, Visual Studio Code does, Windows Terminal does. I think most of the stuff they're doing outside of actual Windows is open source.
I hope they'll open source the thing that lets me turn off the sound icon on Windows so I can not have 2 little speakers.
Hey, it works just fine in Windows 10. I can tell you that.
That's fine. Okay, anyway.
Windows Terminal is a great terminal. If you use for a terminal, you already know that. Unless you're using, what is the other one everybody likes? Commander?
Yes. I believe so, yeah.
CMDER.
Yeah.
Is another terminal emulator people like. But Windows Terminal has been really good. The main reason I threw it on here, they made a change in the last version.
What'd they do, Brad?
They changed the color of the tab. The tab bar is very visually confusing now. Okay. I was not the first one to complain about this. Quite a few other people.
Oh, yeah.
They changed a bunch of colors to try to correspond with the Windows 11 UI kind of handbook.
Yeah.
And in the process made it really hard at a glance to tell which tab is the active tab. It's not great. Anyway, other people complained, but I also went on there and politely complained in the issues on GitHub. Sure enough, one of the kind of main developers of Windows Terminal responded and said, hey, we've heard you loud and clear. Like we screwed up. This was not a great change. We are actually working on letting you just customize the stuff yourself.
Oh, that's a good outcome.
And it's just like, I don't know. I don't have a lot of encounters on the internet that result in warm, fuzzy feelings these days. But politely making a suggestion about a thing you use and also going out of your way to say like, hey, thanks for your work on this. Like it's really been improving a lot lately. And having them positively respond, and say like, hey, we get it. We agree. We're going to change this. Like it feels cool.
I mean, that's the promise, right? You're part of a community now.
Right. Yeah. And like people that make software want it to be better, right?
I think this is just your anti-notch bias coming back again, Brad.
What are you talking about? You can't drag that in here. That's nothing to do with this.
It just looks like a notch. That's all I'm saying. Anyway.
It does. Yes, it does not resemble the notch. You're right.
Yeah. Truth comes out.
Look, good UI. It's priceless.
Fair. See, I use Signal a ton. It's a messaging app. It's open source. They've had a couple of issues lately where they've been adding new features and kind of, I don't want to say dragging their feet, but they've been slow to add the code for new features that are mostly tied to some unfortunate crypto stuff to their repos. But as a whole, in terms of a piece of software that uses open, like well-reviewed, not critically reviewed, but code-reviewed security and encryption to protect your communications, it's hard to argue that Signal is not a best-in-class for widespread use on the internet now.
I mean, it's basically WhatsApp, but not controlled by a giant corporation.
Yeah, and also WhatsApp uses Signal's encryption standards.
Yes. In fact, one of the two founders of WhatsApp, the guy who was second in line to make the billions of dollars when WhatsApp sold, is now like very heavily behind Signal.
Yeah.
And they've addressed some of the stuff you talked about not releasing source code instantly.
Oh, that's good.
I found an issue on their GitHub repo where Moxie Marlinspike himself responded.
And
gave what seemed like some pretty decent rationale for why they had been lagging on that stuff.
Okay, fair. Let's see. Last one, WinMerge.
WinMerge.
I like to win and I like to merge, Brad.
I recommend it. It's an open source graphical tool for Windows that lets you diff directories very easily.
Oh, so if you have like a copy of a folder from your server on your desktop, you can make sure you have all the exact same files?
Yeah, so you can set the parameters it'll diff by, like creation and modified time, size, like actual contents. It'll do like quick contents where I guess it's probably hashing a small amount of the file or something.
Yeah.
Or you can do full contents, which takes forever if you have like tens of thousands of files.
Like it does bit by bit?
You can have it do that.
Wow.
I don't do that because generally you just want to know, like, did I copy all the files right or not?
Yeah, generally you can generate a hash on each file. If the hashes line up, you're probably okay.
Yeah, it's just a very quick way to just plug two paths in and say, hey, are these the exact same in terms of contents or not? Tell me.
Interesting.
Quite useful.
Okay.
I recommend it. Yeah.
That sounds great.
There's an open source tool for everything.
So I would love to hear what people's open source favorites are.
Yeah.
Either alternatives to commercial products that you've used that you find are useful and good, and maybe we'll feature the best ones in an upcoming episode. You can send them to fosspod@content.town. We will read them all, I promise. That brings us to the end of another episode of the FOSS-Pod, Brad.
We're here.
As always, thank you to our patrons at Google. The FOSS-Pod is brought to you by Google Open Source. They bring all the value of open source to Google and all the resources of Google to open source. You can find out more at opensource.google. The FOSS-Pod is produced by us. I'm Will Smith.
That's right. I am Brad Shoemaker for now. Producer, Brad Shoemaker. Yes.
It's edited by Sabrina Hill. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of the show. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you then.